This program is made possible by a grant from Friends of the Library, Maryville, Tennessee.
My first job with Alcoa was during the summer of 1920, but at the pot rooms, when I spent 3 months working in the pot lines and in the handling of some of the labor in that facility. And we're told the possibility of a strike, and somebody got some food in case somebody had to stay overnight, not knowing it was going to be developed into a major shutdown. The cost of operating the lawnmowers became something to think about, and somebody had the idea of buying goats and put them in there and let them mow the yard. In other words, they were called their goat lawnmowers.
This is Foothills Profile, featuring conversations with individuals whose lives have made special contributions to the history of Blount County, Tennessee. This month, Nina Megginson talks with retired Alcoa Aluminum Company employee John Hood.
Today I have the pleasure of talking with Mr. John W. Hood, who is an employee of the Aluminum Company of America in Tennessee and has just retired after 44 years of service. Really, that's not very true because it's been 20 years since you retired.
Been the fastest 20 years of my life.
What are your earliest remembrances of your interest in the metal industry, and when did the Aluminum Company of America choose Blount County, Tennessee for the site of its first plant here?
My first interest in the metal industry occurred when I was a senior in high school in Knoxville, because at that time at the Chamber of Commerce they helped us seniors in high school understand industry around the country, around the local country. I was interested in Alcoa particularly because at that time they were building dams up in the mountains, where one of my favorite places was going, and also in the zinc mines in Mascot and the copper mines down Copper Hill. But it urged me at that time to become interested in metallurgy because I thought it had a future here in Tennessee. Now, the reason Alcoa came to Maryville was because of hydroelectric power. The cost of electricity is one of the principal reasons for pricing the price of aluminum when it's finished. Therefore, low-cost electric power is important for competition over the world and the use of aluminum as compared to other materials. In order to obtain hydroelectric power here, it was necessary for Alcoa to come here and explore the Little Tennessee River, which had the prospects of being a navigable and a dammable tributary to hydroelectric power. In 1910, Alcoa sent a group here to determine the riparian rights of use of the Little Tennessee River. And in 1914, they started the pot rooms here in Maryville, Tennessee, which was within distance of the generator of power, which is brought here by cable. And the first smelting operations were on March the 6th, 1914 in Alcoa. Now, the company did not at that time have any power lines coming down from the mountains, so they started with a steam-generated generator, and that continued until they got connected with the power generated in the mountains. Now, in 1919, the first dam that Alcoa built in Tennessee or in North Carolina for the use in Alcoa was Chioa, which is up in North Carolina. And that was followed by a 1928 Santitla Dam, which was a source of storage water for the other dams. In 1930, Calderwood Dam. And those were the three dams which started off this area in the production of hydroelectric power for use in manufacturing aluminum. Now, up until 1920, the only use for aluminum produced here was in the form of ingot or pig shipped to other places where it was converted into usable products. But in 1920, Alcoa built the first sheet mill here, which is known now as the West Plant, but at that time it was said to be the largest aluminum rolling mill in the world. And my first job with Alcoa was during the summer of 1920, but at the pot rooms, when I spent 3 months working in the pot lines and in the handling of some of the labor in that facility. In 1921, when I graduated from college, I asked for a job here, but they weren't hiring anybody because of the Depression. But I got a job at the Fulton Company in Knoxville, where I worked for a year, and then finally got associated with Alcoa in 1922.
Of course, there was no Alcoa at that time. How did the plant change the area?
Well, the company, knowing it was going to build a plant here, bought property in this particular area on which to build homes for the employees they were going to hire in the plant. And they hired a contractor to build the houses, and they built houses at a pretty rapid pace back in the late 19s and 20s. But when they came to hiring people, they found that many of them did not want to come here to live. They wanted to stay on the farms and commute to work, so that many of those houses were partly finished for a number of years. It wasn't until several years later that all the houses were occupied and finally sold to the occupants for their own use. But that was the start of the city of Alcoa, which is, of course, an adjunct to Maryville, but it was cities in its own rights.
There are 3 plants located in Blount County now. When were the first 2 constructed, and what were their primary functions?
Well, of course, the South Plant, as we now call it, was the pot rooms. It was constructed to produce metal aluminum from ore, or alumina, as we call it. And in 1920, the sheet mill was the first mill to manufacture sheet. In 1930, a plate mill was added to the South Plant, or rather to the West Plant sheet mill, in order to manufacture large pieces of plate for use in buildings and equipment which required thick sheets. And in 1941, the North Plant was built. Now, this was when the President of the United States, President Roosevelt, said that he was going to want more airplanes for the Lend-Lease program, which he had established with our allies in World War II. And our management thought if he wanted that many airplanes, we're going to have to build plants to make that much more aircraft sheet. So plants were designed, the North Plant and similar plants in Chicago and Spokane, Washington, for the sole purpose of making aircraft sheet for the war. Now, I happened to be here in March 1941 when the first steel work was put up for the North Plant. And as you know, Pearl Harbor occurred in December 41, so that it was a very timely time to increase our ability to manufacture aircraft sheet. And during that period in the early 40s, Alcoa could not accept orders for any aluminum products unless they had something to do with the war materials. Aircraft sheet, the aircraft parts, the motor parts, everything that had to do with airplanes. And our customers were told that they cannot buy sheet unless they made something that flies. So that these became very important products. And when you think about it, had the United States not had the airplane fleet that they had to fight World War II, it's very questionable in our minds that we could have come out and defeated the enemy to the degree that we did, so that we can give credit to the foresight in building these plants to help in a massive way to our country to compete in World War II.
You began your career in the 1920s with the Aluminum Company of America. What was your primary job at that time after your studies in college?
Well, I became a staff metallurgist at the Niagara Falls plant, which is then operating as a sheet mill, and also at Toronto, Canada, which is across the lake from Niagara Falls. And then I was transferred down to Alcoa sheet mill in 24, and then back up to New Kensington, Pennsylvania in 27, and again back to Alcoa in 32, and finally to Edgewater Works in New Jersey in 38, and then from there to Pittsburgh in 44. So I spent the first 22 years in 5 different plants in different locations in the United States and Canada, and 22 years at headquarters in Pittsburgh, a total of 44 years.
There were 2 major strikes in the early years of the company. What do you recall about the years of 1934 and 1937?
Well, in 1934, Alcoa, the Tennessee operations, had the first strike in its history. And we were at the sheet mill at that time, or what is now the West Plant, and were told the possibility of a strike, and somebody got some food in case somebody had to stay overnight, not knowing it was going to be developed into a major shutdown. The pickets showed up and left the plant idle. The furnaces were full of molten metal. The rolls were stopped, but nothing was done about them. So we had 200 men stayed in the plant. Some of them were the laborers to help with it, to drain the furnaces, to prepare the rolls, to keep them from rusting, and to prepare for a strike. The small amount of food we had in there went quickly, and I was asked to order enough food. Now, I phoned outside to people who were interested in helping us in the company for what I thought we needed, and I think they doubled what I said, and they ordered this mail to send in by mail. We found the postage the pickets would let the mail in, but would not let anybody come in except the man carrying the mail. So this food was sent in by mail to get by the picket line, and by the time it was to arrive, everybody in the plant was pretty hungry. And I remember everybody got a club, a lot of people did, and they stood down at the door and they thought if those pickets stopped this food coming in, we're going to have a real fight. But fortunately, the pickets said, well, gosh, this is fun, we'll help you unload it. So they helped us unload the food into the plant, and we set up a place where we could cook on the furnace ovens and everything, and we were supplied everything we needed by mail. And one of the things that the paper wanted to do, the newspaper here, was to send in some little child, to show that the mail would go through regardless of who it was. And they chose my daughter and the daughter of the editor of the Maryville Enterprise. They were within weight of carrying by a postman, and they put tags on them and mailed them into the plant. Now, this was quite an experience for the children who still remember it, and this happened, of course, gosh, 52 years ago. But eventually the strike was settled and everybody went back to work, and everything went along in very good shape for a long time until 1937. Then the strike again occurred, and this time the pickets went out, and they did not handle it the same way they did in 34, but word came in that a lot of them want to go back to work. So it was announced that as of a certain date, the plant would open for business if anybody wanted to come to work. Being advised of that, the pickets all lined up down on the street below the gate there at the West Plant, and they were equipped with clubs. And but they were told not to go beyond a certain point. Now, At that time, a newspaper reporter from Knoxville came over and said, "Are you boys going to sit here and let these guys go in and get your jobs?" Well, that stirred them up, and they all ran towards the gate to try to block the gate. But in the meantime, Alcoa City had hired a lot of people to help guard the plant. They were told not to carry arms, but when they were told this was happening, they got their arms and came rushing in, and quite a battle occurred. And a picture came out in the next morning's paper showing the sign across the gate which says, "We are for safety first at all time," and underneath that was a man shooting a gun. So this was a climax of a very serious strike. As a matter of fact, the National Guard was called in to stop it, and they put a whole guard around the whole fence line and set up a machine gun on the roof of the entrance, which they said they would never use, of course. The officers' quarters were set up near the gate there. And a lot of men wanted to get back to work but didn't know how to get by to avoid it. Now, some of them tried to crawl over the fence back behind, and they were stopped by the National Guard and brought around. In fact, one of the guys came in with this whole string of guys he'd picked up, and the officer today said, "What are you boys doing back there?" I said, we're just doing whatever this gentleman tells us. He was a soldier bringing them in. So, and when the National Guard got there, I happened to be there when they were unloading, and one of the boys said, "What are we supposed to do here?" And another says, "I don't know. We're supposed to let the good ones in and to keep the bad ones out, I think." So that was the National Guard instructions. So that strike finally ended and went back to work of reasonable peacefulness.
You spent 22 of your 44 years with the aluminum company here in Tennessee. Surely you have some remembrances, especially of some amusing things that happened other than your daughter being brought into the aluminum company during the strike. What about the lawnmower that was purchased?
Well, it occurred at what is now the West Plant when it was built in 1920. There's nothing but mud around the plant at the time, and people had a hard time getting into it, and they came in by horseback, as a matter of fact, many of them. But it was finally finished, and the place was fenced in, and the asphalt roads were built to the plant, and grass was planted around the plant to add to the beauty of it and to make it look better. The cost of operating the lawnmowers became something to think about, and somebody had the idea of buying goats and put them in there and let them mow the yard. In other words, they were called their goat lawnmowers, and they worked all right until one of them got loose in the plant and climbed up on the rolling mill and got into himself shocked in the electrical power. And another one saw his reflection in a parked car out in the parking lot and butted the door in. So that ended the goat lawnmower procedures.
The Aluminum Company of America has been very generous to Blount County and the city of Alcoa in many ways, including education and sports and the arts. What are some of the ways in the early years and now that Alcoa has been primarily promoting these areas?
Well, again, in 1920, when I was working here in the summer, Alcoa had a baseball team, and it was over on near Wright Road, near the South Plant, what was in the South Plant entrance. And many of the boys that lived there were on the baseball team. The team was represented Alcoa in the Industrial League, which competed with other industries in Knox and Blount counties, and was managed, as a matter of fact, by a professional baseball manager from, used to be in the Southern League. But the company thought this was good relations with employees, and it was, because for the games, many of the employees came to watch the games, and people from outside did too. So it gave us something of interest generally to the employees. Now, some of the team on there they're all workers, they're all employees of Alcoa, but some of them paid more attention to baseball than did the working. As a matter of fact, one of them, at least one, went into the big leagues finally as a baseball player. So we had a pretty good team we were very proud of at the time, and that was part of the extracurricular activities where the company got into. Now later, the company, when we came here in the early 25s, the company thought that, well, up at New Kensington they had a country club not too far from the plant up there, and that the location down here would be better off for employees in general, the community in general, with a country club. And they suggested that this country club be built. In fact, had a part of the land they'd bought for the development of Alcoa was available for the use of the country club. And it was established in 1925, and Ms. Hood and I happened to be charter members. That happened to be the year we were married, and we were charter members of that club. There were very few people in the club. In fact, two, I think, had ever belonged to a club before. And the question came up is, what shall we call this club? Well, I thought Mountain View would be a good name for it because we could see the mountains from there. But I was overruled, and they said, no, that wouldn't do. So I said, well, why don't we call it the Very, Very Country Club, because most people are country people who are playing in it. So we finally came out with Green Meadow Country Club, which has been to this day. So that was part of the... Now, in addition to that, you know, the Alcoa Foundation, which is sponsored and financed by Alcoa, has been very active in bringing talent to Maryville College into the city with the performances of their people who are artists and singing and other things. So the Alcoa Foundation has been an important part in improving the image of Alcoa in their various places where they operate plants. Back in the 30s, when we were starting out and TVA came in, we wanted it known that Alcoa was the original developer of hydroelectric power in this state, and we admired TVA for imitating what Alcoa was doing, was the way we put it. But at that time, we made it clear that Alcoa is an industry which took nothing out of the state at all in the form of ore or anything else. We shipped everything in we were going to make into aluminum. And instead of depleting the north sources of Tennessee, Alcoa has developed power here that would not otherwise have been developed. And this has continued now. At that time, the payroll was something like $3 million, which seemed like a lot of money in the Depression of '32. Today, we have 3,600 employees with a payroll of $140 million here in this county. And this is important. And furthermore, we have about the equal number of retirees who've come here or stayed here as we have employees now. And they get pensions also, which has contributed to the general economy of the county. Now, in that respect, we're very proud of the fact that Alcoa, over the years, has developed into a useful operation, which is of value to everybody in this community. Incidentally, in the more recent years with Alcoa, in fact, early in the years with the plants, my principal job was to work on the quality of product we were manufacturing. And here it became important, obviously, to keep our products sold in competition with other products, that we had to meet the quality requirements of our customers. And this required an organization and building of the processes necessary to provide what we now call quality assurance in our plants, so that Alcoa is now in position more than ever before to compete worldwide with other materials, and particularly with aluminum products.
In behalf of the present and the future citizens of Blount County, I thank you, Mr. Hood, for visiting with us today and sharing your memories and the history of the Aluminum Company of America in Tennessee.
Well, thank you for the opportunity for doing it.
Foothills Profile, featuring conversations with individuals whose lives have made special contributions to the history of Blount County, Tennessee. This month's profile, retired Aluminum Company of America employee, John Hood. This has been a production of WFBA Television, Alcoa. This program has been made possible by a grant from Friends of the Library, Maryville, Tennessee.